Azco Technologies, Technician Installation Guidelines. Today we'll be covering how to cable, using valens, accessories and tools for the job, and picking the right camera for the job. Installation Guidelines, Part 1, How to Cable. Sources of installation practices. The variety of sources of installation practices creates a challenge for the installer community. Knowing them, understanding them, and knowing where to refer to them. Today we're going to cover off some main points used commonly for CCTV installations. Following recommended practices is important. The quality of your installation has a great impact on the quality of the overall performance of the structured cabling system. Copper cabling installation practices. Today we'll be referring a lot to Cat5e, also known as twisted pair cable, or UTP, is a common cable used for telephone and network cabling. It is important to avoid kinks and knots and twisting during the installation of this cable. If you do have a kink or a knot, or it doesn't pull easily out of the box, cut the cable and re-pull again. Copper cabling installation practices. Cat5, Cat5e, Cat6 are cables often used for network cabling, telephone cabling, security cabling, and CCTV cabling. These cables are made to be balanced, and to avoid noise or crosstalk within the pairs of the cable, it's important to make sure that you treat the cable with care when installing it. Avoiding kinks, knots, and twisting during installation of cable is important. If you do have any of these, cut and re-pull the cable. Careful handling of your boxes will help prevent kinks within the boxes. Having it set properly and having a box that has a nice wide mouth for even payout makes it a lot easier and will avoid some of these problems with. Do not install cold or frozen cables. Do not leave cables that may freeze in trucks overnight if you plan to install it the next morning. Cold or frozen cables are more difficult to pull, but can be very easily damaged when pulling into place. Pulling tension. Twisted pair cables, again known as Cat5e or Cat6 cables, should have no more than 25 pounds tensile force pulled on them. Pulling any more than this will actually twist the pairs and damage the integrity of the cable, compromising its performance. Use the proper tools when pulling cable. Make sure you don't compromise bend radiuses. This tool, the AZ Pull from Azco, allows you to pull vertically or horizontally around corners or up to the ceiling, etc., without compromising the bend radius of the cable, and of course having less tension on the cable during the pull. Makes it a lot easier as a one-man pull as well. Cable supports and suspended ceilings, also known as drop ceilings or T-bar ceilings. Pay attention to your local codes when installing these applications. Our recommendations are to support spacing no more than 60 inches apart, staggering spacing when possible, and making sure that cable jackets are not distorted, or otherwise known as squished, from the cables above it within that support. Often codes do not allow cables to be laid on top of ceiling tiles or supported off the actual ceiling wires that are already in place. But using independent ceiling wire, you can use Azco cable hangers to support your cable above the ceiling tiles in the ceiling space. Often when pulling cables into the ceiling space, actual T-bar grids of that suspended ceiling can be damaged by the cables being pulled over it. Using an AZT slide, not only does it protect the actual metal framework, but protects the actual cables themselves from getting damaged. Another great tool for getting cables in place is the Azco laser line. This air gun allows you to use a laser, point at your target, and shoot a dart up to 120 feet away. The dart carries a pull line, allowing you to pull the cable back into place to where you need it. Stapling cable. Do not use regular cable staples or staple guns. Do not use Romex or electrical wire cable staples. Only use insulated staples that have standoffs to prevent the staple from damaging the actual cable itself. As you can see here with the Azco AZS667 staple gun, not only does it use the insulated staples preventing the cable from getting damaged, but also uses a cable guide in the front and rear of the stapler so the kickback doesn't damage the cable on the rear. Avoid sources of EMI, electrical magnetic interference, fluorescent light ballasts, electrical cables. When you do come across electrical cables, only cross them at a right angle, electrical motors, and RFI sources. As you can see here, we've noticed electrical panels, light fixtures, transformers, fridges, microwaves, anything that can create a signal to interfere with the actual Cat5e or Cat6 cable and degrading its performance. Avoid allowing cables to get wet, and especially allowing the cables to sit in water. This can cause return loss failure or noise. Use cables that are rated for outdoor use. Often they are gel-filled cable, special for that application. Often we don't think that conduits under buildings will be filled with water, but quite often are. So keep this in mind. Avoid installing cables near sources of heat, whether that's hot water pipes, fireplaces, furnaces, any kind of forced air heating system. Attenuation can be created by any type of fluctuation in temperature on that cable. Keep that in mind when installing your cables. Avoid painting cables after installation. Paints are often full of complex chemicals which can often affect the cable's performance. Check with the cable manufacturer before painting the cables or avoiding the warranty on those cables. Possibly surface raceways may be a better way to cover up those cables Cable ties are acceptable by TIA standards, but are recommended that you don't tighten them too much to damage the outer jacket of the cable. Hook and loop straps or cable wrap from Azco are a better option as they do not crimp or cinch too tightly on the cable and of course are reusable. Azco offers cable wrap light in the small 75-foot rolls or the heavy-duty cable wrap in the 600-foot rolls. This allows contractors and dealers to cut it to length to what they require to bundle the cables as required. As you can see in the application here, they've bundled each bundle together and then bundled all the bundles together with the cable wrap. Service loops. When using service loops to accommodate future installs and flexibility in cabling, always put it in a figure 8 or loop it out around a cable tray. Never use a round. Bend radius. Keep in mind that sharp 90-degree angles will damage the actual cable or twist within inside the cable and of course ultimately the performance of that cable. When using Cat 5 or Cat 5e, it should be a 1-inch bend radius or 4 times outside diameter. When using a Cat 6 cable, 1.2-inch bend radius, and when using a screened or shielded cable, use a 2-inch bend radius to protect that cable. As you can see, bend radius application on the far left, and of course a misapplication on the right of a sharp 90, and a proper application on in the middle of how to do it properly. At termination, the installer must be cautious in using snips, cutters, pocket knives, or stripping tools when removing the cable jacket, as to not cut the insulation of the actual pairs on the inner conductors. The TIA 568-B.1 standard requires the installer to only remove as much of the cable sheath as necessary to terminate the cable onto the connecting hardware. It is recommended that no more than 1 inch of that outer sheath or jacket be stripped back. When terminating the cable, it's necessary to untwist the twisted pair of the conductors somewhat in order to fit them into the IDC terminations or into balins or other such devices. It is recommended that you never untwist more than half of an inch. The more untwisting that is created, the more noise in the cable will be created, therefore degrading the performance of the cable. Wiring scheme. T568A and T568B are two different wiring schemes. What you'll see here in the diagram from the A to the B is the switch in pairs between the green and the orange pairs in their spots within the pinout. When terminating cables, make sure that both ends are always terminated the same, and they should be in one of these configurations and should follow the manufacturer's directions or specifications of the project. Sliding the individual wires down into the slots and then using an impact punch-down tool can carefully seat the wires into the slots properly, making full contact. The Azco AZ-EZ RJ45 crimp tool not only crimps the RJ45 plugs and the ends of the cable, but also cuts off the excess wire from each one of the pairs. These connectors work really well with the Power Video balins from Azco. Don't tread on cables, don't step on cables. Try to place your cables, whether temporary or permanent, away from customers, employees, or other trade technicians on the site, making sure that they don't walk on cables, roll over carts or hand trucks, damaging the cables. Splices are not allowed in the horizontal cabling standards. Splicing requires stripping back the jacket, separating the pairs, and untwisting the pairs. All these would degrade the high frequency performance of the cabling system. Repull another cable.